Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you again with another APUSH video. Once again, we're taking a look at topic 6.2, taking a look at westward expansion and economic development. This is the third video on this topic. Now, previously we have talked about how various industries were starting to have a profound effect on the development of the West. The railroads, mining, cattle ranching, but perhaps the industry, if you will, that's going to have the most impact will be farming. Now, we've mentioned previously that, folks moving to the plains as a part of the Homestead Act, for example, are going to face tremendous challenges in trying to become successful farmers. But we will start to see success take hold in the plains. And when you add these farmers with farmers that are already in operation, in the eastern half of America, you're going to see an even broader geographic base of farmers. And this broad national farming group of Americans will face new challenges, profound challenges, in the latter half of the 19th century after the Civil War ends. Now, even though we're having more of a broader geographic range of farmers, take a look at this stat right here. If we look at the last 40 years of the 19th century, we're going to see the number of farms doubling across America. So we're going to see twice as much land being used for farming, but the actual amount of Americans that are going to be farmers, will drop in half. During this time period, during the late 1800s, we're going to see for the first time in America's history that farming not be the most common occupation in America. By the time we get to the 20th century, only about 1 in 3 Americans will be farmers. So what's going to be happening? What's going to be changing besides the fact that the farms are going to get bigger and the amount of farmers are going to get smaller? Well, an additional change that's going to be happening is that you're going to see more and more reliance by individual farmers on a specific type of crop. It might be corn, it might be wheat, it might be soybeans or whatever. Very little crop rotation. They tend to have more of an attitude of, we're going to specialize in one crop, we're going to invest in the machinery necessary for the harvesting, the planting and harvesting of a specific crop, and going from there. Now, that's going to come with some risk. If you're all in on one particular crop and that crop doesn't go well, you're going to be in trouble. However, if the prices are high for that crop, well, then you're going to, come out like gangbusters. Now, note, as the, number of farms are going to be increasing, there's going to be more land that has to be farmed. Therefore, you need to have even more investments in farm crop production. So we're going to be seeing, more farms buying big, large combines for harvesting. And the idea being is that the more that you plant, the more that you grow, the more that you harvest, the more money that you will make. At least that's the basic rationale for it. So the idea is do whatever you can to grow as many crops as possible. And that would mean more and more expensive machinery. And that's going to be problematic for small mom and pop farmers. One of the things that we're going to notice is that small family farms that had kind of dominated the American landscape for the first 100 years of our history as an independent country are going to start to be driven out by these big corporate or bonanza farming, as they called it, operations. And so, when we take a look at that, the more that we see of a production of crops, you don't have to be an economics major to realize that the more crops that are being grown and harvested, the more, bushels of wheat that are going to be produced, well, wheat then is going to start to become cheaper on an individual bushel level. So what serves as the mindset to try to maximize profits, grow as much, as many crops as you can, is actually going to be self-defeating on the national level, with the idea of, well, now you got all these farmers trying to maximize their crop production, which then drops the national price of a particular crop, which then makes it even harder to try to make a profit, which means for the individual farmer, I need to grow more crops to try to make up for it, and it only creates a more and more compounded problem. Now, we're also going to be seeing in the 1870s a period of economic deflation, a time of heavy reliance on the gold standard, and we're actually going to see prices drop and wages drop because the value of the currency is actually going to be increasing. Now, bankers love that, but if you are a farmer that owes money on land that you are, that you've borrowed money for, that's going to be even more crippling because now it becomes even harder to pay back your debts. On top of all of these other challenges, the machinery is very expensive. The prices of the crops are going down. On top of that, as a farmer, you are totally getting manipulated by the railroad syndicates that are basically in cahoots with the bigger, larger farms and industries and give them cheaper rate deals to ship their products on their rail lines compared to the small family farms. They're going to be paying more per bushel that's going to be transported. So if you are a small mom and pop operation, you are facing challenges that your grandparents and great-grandparents simply didn't face in American history. You are having to work harder to grow more crops, invest more money to get less of a profit as a result of what's going on. So, as a result of all this, take a look at what's gonna, here, let me pull you here. Take a look at this right here. I mean, you can see as we get into the, into this graph right here, you're going to be noticing that, as we get into the 1880s, eventually in 1890s, we're going to be seeing that the ability to make a profit is going to become very, very challenging, and for more and more farmers, simply impossible. So the idea of being that small, independent farmer is going to be tougher and tougher and tougher. So farmers are going to have to evolve and adapt and come up with new ways, really ways to organize both economically and politically to address these challenges. And one of these ways is going to be the creation of what we call the Grange Movement, or to be formal, as you can see here, the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry, but basically the Grange Movement. So what is this Grange Movement all about? Well, the Grange Movement was the idea to some extent of taking some of the principles of factory industrial unionization, the idea of working together for a shared goal and common purpose, and apply that to farmers. Now, obviously, farmers are independent operators. They don't have, owners that, dictate what they do. But they can work together to try to, for example, offset the costs of farming machinery. If every single farmer has, a combine, that becomes very expensive for each individual farmer. And darn well that not every farmer is going to be using their individual combine every day. So the idea by the Granger movement was, well, let's try to pool resources together and buy shared farm equipment, for example, and then schedule out who gets to use the farm equipment. Therefore, everybody benefits from the equipment, but then has fewer costs that have to be incurred for it. So the Grange movement is also going to be focusing in on trying to promote state laws that are going to force railroad companies to have fair shipping rates on their rail lines. And this is going to be upheld, actually, by the Supreme Court in Munn versus Illinois. So the Grange movement is going to have an impact. The idea of organizing farmers to try to, achieve shared goals, shared interests, trying to survive financially in more and more challenging and desperate times. The Grange is also going to have a function of, a quasi-fraternal component to it. So, there's kind of like an Elks Lodge, Moose Lodge kind of a vibe to it as well. It's not going to last as a big organization for very long, but it is going to create a core foundation for what's going to be happening next. As we, get into the 1870s and into the 1880s, there starts to become more of a sense that, hey, as a farmer, you don't have just economic interests, you have political interests. You need to have government action to protect you from the greedy bankers, protect you from the greedy railroad operators, and so on and so forth. And so you start to see what starts with the Grange movement evolve into what becomes the Farmers Alliance movement. Now, the Farmers Alliance movement is going to be a much more, upfront political organization. I would kind of describe this as somewhere between an interest group nationally, like the Grange, and a formal political party. It's kind of, I would say, like a hybrid of the two. So it's going to be more, directly political. It will nominate some candidates for office, not on a broad-based level, but, a little bit. As you can see here, there's going to be, some states that are going to be controlling legislatively, and they're going to have a small minority in Congress. But what this Farmers Alliance is going to start to do is start to say, hey, listen, these farmers need direct representation in government. They have specific needs that have to be looked after by the government. And the idea is that the Republican Party and the Democratic parties, neither one of those major parties could be trusted to do what is needed. There just was a sense that, farmers have to be looking out for fellow farmers. Now, this is going to, continue to gain momentum as we go, later into the 1880s and eventually into the 1890s. For example, we see, at the creation of the National Farmers Alliance in 1890, we're going to see an organized political platform be created that is going to be speaking to a sense of meeting the needs of farmers, but also reform in a general sense, cleaning up government, which had become so corrupted during this time period. The Grant era of good stealings, which kind of evolves into the Gilded Age of politics and graft and patronage and all this kind of stuff. And so the thought was farmers need honest government. They need good government. They need to make sure that they have a government that's looking out for them. And here's some of the things that they're going to be demanding as a Farmers Alliance in 1890. Direct election of U.S. senators. Remember, senators at this point were still chosen by state legislatures. Well, if you have state legislators that are corrupt, well, guess what? They're going to choose corrupt U.S. senators that are looking out for, say, bankers and not farmers. The idea of, promoting lower tariff rates. This has been something that farmers have been, in support of forever. If you have lower tariff rates, then, things are cheaper to buy for the average American, including, being able to just survive. You know what I mean? A graduated income tax. Now, note, the income tax starts during the Civil War, but only exists during that time period. The idea of an actual permanent income tax is going to be new, and it's going to be floated by these farmers. The idea being is that, if you have an income tax, you now have a revenue stream for the federal government that's not based on a high tariff. And if you graduate it, in other words, you charge a higher percentage in taxes based on how much money you have, well, that means that the wealthier Americans are going to be paying a much larger share of the government taxes than poor working class farmers. The idea being is that rich urban bankers and financiers can afford to pay these taxes, whereas poor family farmers can't. They wanted to see the creation of a federal banking system, to some degree, a return to a Bank in the United States kind of a thing. Remember, the banking industry was really unregulated, and they were able to use their power as banks to kind of, keep their thumb financially on the farmers, keep them indebted. They wanted to see the federal government get involved in the economy to the extent of actually having the government store excess crops that could then be used at times when there's lower crop production. They can artificially keep prices higher for farmers. Have the federal government be responsible, for example, for taking over the railroad industry. Have the railroads be not for profit. Basically trying to get away from middlemen, shippers, and holders of crops, warehousing of crops, keep those folks from, financially hurting them. And then lastly, taking what had been that strict gold standard based currency that has high value, that helps the lenders, keeps the value high and prices low, convert more of that to silver based currency, which drops the value, creates inflation, raises the prices of crops, make it easier then to pay back debts. So you're starting to see now with the Farmers Alliance a real activism politically that's going to be happening, and this will be the precursor of something that is going to have seismic effects in the 1890s, the Populist Party. But we will get to that at a later time. All right? For now, That's it. We'll see you next time.